We need the land in order to hold on to who we are. The pride, the culture, the history, everything goes together.
We must keep people away whose interest is not the survival of the culture, but whose interest is purely financial.
The will to survive, the story of the Gullah Geechee Nation, is the story of the survival and struggle of a little-known piece of American history. But who are the Gullah and Geechee people? Where do they come from? And why is so little known about them? Join me as we go inside this society that has survived in almost total obscurity for more than 300 years. From the Gullahs of the Carolinas to the Georgia and Florida Geechees, we'll explore the history, the present, and the fight for the future, for what has been called the most authentically African community in the United States.
Your field, all there with this mortar and this pestle and thing, when all that spirit been together and walk so.
This African-American woman was born and raised in South Carolina, yet she is speaking in her native tongue. The language is called Gullah, or Geechee, and it is the language and the lifestyle of more than 500,000 African-Americans living along the southeastern seaboard of the United States.
We got taken from West Africa because of our skills in growing rice. Many people desired rice growers, and so Gullah people came as a result of their skills in growing rice.
Emery Campbell was born on Hilton Head Island, where he still lives today.
Gullah, which we spell today G-U-L-L-A-H, was actually from the Gullah people, G-O-L-A, which came from the Rice Coast or Windward Coast region of West Africa, as we once called it, Al-Kebula. And they were some of the rice cultivators that were brought in to harvest Carolina gold rice.
Marquetta Goodwine, born on St. Helena Island, South Carolina, founded the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition in 1996. In July of 2000, she was elected chiefess of the Gullah Geechee Nation by a council of elders, and in the African tradition, assumed the name Queen Quet.
And then you had from the same region the Geechee people, G-I-D-Z-I, which Geechee, which we spell now G-E-E-C-H-E-E, came out of.
Along with their knowledge of agriculture, the Africans also brought a unique sense of architecture.
Tabby itself is a unique architectural unit to use to build any kind of structure because it's made of oyster shells, lime, and sand and water.
Sapelo, St. Helena Island, and Hilton Head, we consider them Ellis Island because that's where freedom first came. That's where folks had the first opportunity to buy land and live on their own land. That's where people became educated for the first time, had their own schools, and reinforcing their own education from Africa, as well as learning new things about a new life.
During the Civil War, many Gullah Geechees bought land. It wasn't all just given to us. And almost everybody I speak to, I can ask them if they ever heard of 40 acres and a mule. And they go, oh, yeah. And I said, well, what is it? And you get all kinds of answers. But normally I don't get the answer, Special Field Order number 15. And Special Field Order Number 15 was issued during the Civil War by a general named William Tecumseh Sherman. And a lot of people know about Sherman's march that came through the South and burnt down everything, but they didn't know about him actually looking around him and going, well, wait a minute, there are thousands and tens of thousands of, as they called us, Negroes at that time here, that were in ragged clothing, that were on all of these plantations, because everything from Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida, and 30 to 35 miles inland that people called the Gullah Geechee Nation was all plantations. But now we were the only ones on those plantations. So it's like, well, what are we gonna do with all of these folks? And so he felt like if all of it, from Charleston and all the abandoned rice fields southward to Fernandina, which is down in Florida, the southernmost tip of the Gullah Geechee Nation, if they could split up the land in 40-acre parcels and issue it to each one of us, then each family would have a place to remain on themselves. Well, that field order got rescinded. And when that happened, there was a lot of turmoil. Those who had the field order issued and land issued and granted, they were fought to get the land back, ran off in some places. But fortunately, many of our ancestors had that mother wit, so they didn't go for somebody giving them something. They went to auctions and they bid on their land and they took ownership of the land. So see, when people come here now to this land that we call the Gullah Geechee Nation, a lot of times they don't ask us what we're doing, how we do it, why we do what we're doing, or anything like that. And so they don't have an understanding of what this land really means to us. And that it's not just about walking around with the sweetgrass basket on your head. It's not just about seeing someone still picking cotton or having their hands blue with indigo, but it's about what is still existing here now. And for us, land is our family, and the waterways are our bloodline. And so a lot of times people will come in and want to buy it from us, and they don't understand that's like asking us to resell our entire family on an auction block all over again. So see, when them the things say, them we done had them all together.
In an effort to communicate with each other, the enslaved people combined the many dialects and customs of their African roots with those of their American captors. What resulted was a hybrid language and culture, which proved to be not only an exclusionary means of communication, but also a critical key to their very survival.
So when that throw we up, instead of broke up, we joined together.
We're Geechees. We're saltwater Geechees.
Cornelia Bailey, author of the autobiographical book God, Dr. Buzzard, and the Bolito Man, is a lifelong resident of Sapelo Island, Georgia.
And we were those fast-talking Geechees, and the people from the mainland said these no-talking saltwater Geechees, we can understand a thing the same because they're speaking too fast.
From island to island, with the Gullah language, you will find variations of that language, just like any other language of the world. And Geechee is just one of the dialects that grew out of the Gullah language, or as linguists would call it, it is a pidgin or a bridge language, because what it does is it still has our same structure, but it has more loan words from English in it than Gullah does.
You know, the origin of the word Geechee was not necessarily a proud connection, because it was actually, it turned into something that became a put-down.
Ron Johnson is president of SICARS, Sapelo Island Cultural and Revitalization Society, Incorporated, which sponsors Cultural Day, held annually on Sapelo Island, Georgia.
The slaves that were settled here on these islands was constantly connected with their culture, and they kept the language, and they spoke broken English, and their English didn't develop as fast. When the slave masters would bring slaves with him from the interior, like say from Atlanta or someplace, to buy slaves or to visit the plantations down here, and the slaves would interact. Well, you had one slave that was speaking formal English, and another slave was still speaking a real broken language, which became Geechee. Now the guy that spoke formal English would go back to Atlanta and says, "Man, you should hear those Geechees speaking down there."
We listened for the speech, we listened for the words, we listened for huna, which means you. We listened for da, which is the verb form to be, and however that's connected. And we listened for some cultural expression, like, you know, eat the diggy grave, meaning you're eating too much. We listened for the missing THs and the words that when they pronounce teeth or thief.
So if I was saying, look at where are the going right now, look at you, honey, better come here now, for I juke you. Okay, that would be completely in Gullah. Now, if I changed over and I said, well, we the going boy, you need for come here now, you ain't even want me for juke you any, okay, then that's more Geechee, because I'm trying to now convey to this person who didn't get it the first time what I actually had to say.
We've got terms that are used almost regularly. Juke is a Gullah word meaning disorderly, and that word is now used to describe a place where we go and dance. We call it a juke joint. But jukebox came out of that same word. We hear the word tote often, tote. We have tote bags, you know, that you find, you buy and it's very expensive, but it's to carry. You tote it on your head, and Africans tote things on their head. When African Americans visit the islands, they're first of all struck by the speech and the accents. And we always have to explain that the accent is nothing more than African accent. They sometimes want to relate it to the West Indies accent. And we usually have to convince them that no, some of us came straight here from Africa, but even the settlers of the West Indies also can relate their language and their accent to the West Africa. And so the gee whiz always come from, you know, wow, you talk funny, you sound like an African. And we usually respond and say, we are.
When people come from other parts of the country that doesn't have that connection to the culture as strong as we are, it may be different, but we're all branches from the same culture.
We have our own language. We have our own heritage. We have our own culture. That the rest of what people call African American, that's just a big umbrella over a multiplicity of cultures that are in North America, particularly in the United States. But we're not monolithic as people of African descent. Many of the people who are considered African American today can trace their roots back to the Gullah Geechee Nation, but they no longer hold a legacy because they don't have the language, they don't have the African traditions, they don't know how to work the land or live out of the waterways.
And that's the lesson that people can learn before they go to Africa. They need to visit these islands and hear the accents and get used to the rice dishes too, because there are some rice dishes that are used sometimes now in mainstream America that African Americans don't know where they came from and why they like rice, or why they like sweet potatoes, or why they even like watermelon, although some of us have denied that we do. Those can be traced back to West Africa, the foodways. Growing up on these islands in isolation of other cultures and other people, and instilled in us a sense that we know who we are, and we never had to compete with others to give us value. And so our values came straight from our ancestry.
As recently as the 1960s, the Gullah and the Geechee people practiced their religion in the tradition of their ancestors.
We traditionally seeked, and we seek through the woods. We seeked God by going into the woods 3 times a day. Morning, we call it 4-day, which means before daybreak, midday, and evening. And we meditate alone in the thickest woods you can find, fearing nothing, no snakes, fair snakes or mosquitoes or anything, because we found out later that that's what West Africans did. And West Africans went into the woods because they said that's where God is. And in some plantations, Christianity was imposed. On some plantations, we found out that some people resisted Christianity.